It's great to be back in this room again. It's great to be back in this lodge again. So many warm memories from the past from when I lived here. And I'm still a proud member of Aslan #1 and will remain so. It's an awesome lodge, awesome people, and I really enjoyed the time when I lived here. And it's a pleasure to come back, be in this building, and see a lot of friendly faces. You are friendly, aren't you? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. The topic tonight, for those who don't know me, my name is Joe Panek. I live in Las Vegas now, but I am a proud member of Aslan #1. The topic tonight's going to be consciousness and how it affects us on our Masonic journey. And it comes from a book called Power versus Force, which I found to be fascinating. And again, the name of the book is Power versus Force by David R. Hawkins. So if you find this topic interesting and want a more in-depth information on this topic, here it is. This is a fantastic book. It is said that during the construction of King Solomon's temple, neither the sound of the workmen nor their instruments can be heard. Now, I know all of us have been by construction sites ourselves, and construction sites are anything but silent. Has anybody ever been by a construction site when you couldn't hear the sound of the workmen or their tools? No. So what the heck does this thing mean? Or how could you have a phrase that says, during the construction of King Solomon's temple, neither the sound of the workmen nor their tools can be heard? Well, ancient teachings which filtered into Freemasonry are full of metaphors. And if you understand the metaphor, then you understand what they're teaching you. The reason that you could not hear the sound of the workmen or their tools is because they're not referring to an external temple. They're referring to an internal temple. King Solomon's temple is our personal temple. And the workmen and the tools that are being used to build our temple cannot be heard by anyone else. They're continually at work. We're continually adding things to our personality, taking things from our nature, moving things around. We are constructing our inner temple on a moment-by-moment basis. So that is the meaning of during the construction of King Solomon's temple, no sounds can be heard. It's inner work. And as a matter of fact, there's another symbol associated with inner work, and that is the beehive. And we see that pop up as a symbol of Freemasonry every so often. And here you have it. Where is the work done by the bees? Internally. Therefore, King Solomon's temple, the beehive, is all referring to internal work. And as Masons, we are constantly seeking further light. Light is what? It's enlightenment or consciousness. And to seek higher enlightenment is to seek higher consciousness. In order to receive or achieve higher consciousness, we should have a better understanding of the levels of consciousness so that we can progress to a higher and higher level of consciousness, while at the same time avoiding the lower levels of consciousness, moving up and discarding what's below. I ran across a few days ago a very interesting proverb from the American Indians. There are two wolves fighting inside all of us. The first one is evil, and the second one is good. Which wolf will win? The one you feed. Here we have another metaphor. And the neat thing about metaphors, you can replace words and still maintain the content of the metaphor. So we're going to do that. There are two wolves fighting inside all of us. The first wolf is lower consciousness, and the second wolf is higher consciousness. Which wolf will win? The one you feed. So what are we feeding? Are we concerned about maintaining a lower consciousness or feeding higher and higher consciousness? And this is the goal of all of us as Masons, higher light, higher illumination, higher consciousness. So back to this book, Power versus Force. Let's define power and let's define force. Power, any positive behavior, emotion, or thought. Power is any aspect of consciousness that is self-empowering and uplifting. Power is higher consciousness. Force is any negative behavior, emotion, or thought. Force is any imposition we allow to be placed upon us. Somebody's forcing something on us, and we submit because we want to be nice guys. Force is also any imposition we attempt to place upon someone else. This is tyrannical. This is very low level of consciousness, forcing something upon someone else. Force is any thought or behavior that is self-weakening. And force is lower consciousness. Albert Einstein, who I love to quote, said, "Force always attracts men of low morality." How is force used both by us and against us? Societal, by way of dogmas, propaganda, falsehoods that are constantly fed to us through society's numerous bureaucracies, which result in psychological enslavement. Now think about it. Whenever you have a guilt trip laid upon you by somebody else, no matter who it is, somebody trying to recruit you into their cause, whatever that cause might be, you are psychologically enslaved. This is not your choice. This is something forced upon you, and you are submitting to a lower consciousness. This is food for thought. Force is also used upon us by forcing us or demanding of us to choose sides, or being convinced that we must choose sides, which involves ourselves in the external conflicts that are always surrounding us. Every faction wants our attention. Every faction wants to recruit us into something, whether it's religious, political, or societal. Everybody wants to recruit new followers to their cause, into the battles of someone else. Not your battle, someone else's battles. And the one thing to keep in mind, anytime someone is trying to recruit one of us, they do not have our best interest in mind. If the cause is not yours, or has a deep, sincere movement within you, then it's not your cause. And force is also used by us through personal competition, which we're going to discuss in a little bit. Whatever is not force is power. So simply put, if you eliminate all elements of force in our lives, what's left is power. And power is self-fulfillment and uplifting. Personal power is not about changing the world. It is about perfecting ourselves. What have you come here to do? I have come here to learn, to subdue my passions, and improve myself in Masonry. What is that saying? I have not come here to change the world. I have not come here to recruit. Matter of fact, recruiting is not allowed in Masonry. We know it goes on, but one of the basic tenets of Masonry is not recruiting. The candidate must knock on the door and then be allowed entry. To quote Socrates, "Let him who would move the world first move himself. Let him who would try to improve the world first try to improve himself." When we eliminate all lower levels of consciousness from our thoughts and actions, what remains are the levels of consciousness that are uplifting and empowering. And now we're going to get into some of the contents of this particular book. And a lot of effort was done. Book, I got all kind of dog ears in it for notes. They did an extensive test, which we're going to discuss in a little bit, about levels of consciousness and where they calibrate. And we're going to discuss these levels from the lowest to the highest. And we're going to do it intensively, but it's not going to take a long time. The lowest level of consciousness that they've calibrated, which calibrates as 20, is shame. What is shame? Shame is really low. Shame is the absolute lack of self-esteem. It is absolute no confidence. These people hang their heads. Their eyes are downcast and they cannot look at one another. Someone who's been abducted and not abducted, but abused since childhood, brutally abused, you'll see that they have no self-esteem left. They're afraid to look anybody in the eyes. They feel that they're responsible for all the faults of the world. This is shame. This is really, really negative. One step above shame is guilt, which calibrates at 30. Guilt is when we are preoccupied by accusations of sin. We are the victims of sacrifice. Now, keep in mind that people who ask us to sacrifice don't really sacrifice themselves, do they? But they want us to sacrifice. So guilt, we've all had guilt trips laid on us. We've all had somebody ask us to do something. Maybe they said something to the effect, well, how is it going to make me feel? I promised you'd be there. Well, who told you can speak for me, right? So guilt is preoccupation with sin. Victims of what we're told we should sacrifice. And guilt accepts all the blames that society heaps upon a person. This is still nasty stuff. Next up the ladder is something called apathy. Apathy, which calibrates at 50, is helplessness, nothing to look forward to, incapable of motivating ourselves, poverty, despair, hopelessness. These people are extremely unreliable. Apathy, don't care about anything. Next up on the ladder, at 75, is grief. Grief is sadness, loss, dependency. If it's temporary grief, it will pass. If it's permanent grief, it's totally destructive. Grief is constant regret and depression. Grief is to accept failure as a constant part of life. You can see where these lower levels of consciousness are really, really brutal. At 100 is fear. Fear is the obsession with the endless supply of worrisome events which the world feeds us, which society feeds us. It is a favored tool of oppressive regimes such as church, state, and societal bureaucracies. Now think about what's fed to us by the news, the evening news. Some people watch news all day long. And think about what's being fed. And think about some of the things that, and I'm not stepping on anybody's spiritual beliefs here, but when you get into church dogma, what is that? You need to sacrifice for us, or you're going to be condemned to some sort of a hell, blah, blah, blah. In the political spectrum, you've got to believe our side or the other side is going to take advantage of you. And all society is bent on these lower levels of consciousness. Think about it: guilt, grief, and fear. This is what resonates throughout society. And the reason it resonates so well is because most of society resonates at this level. But the question is, where do we resonate? To this sub 200 level, we can also add anger, hatred, pride, egotism, jealousy, gossip, etc. That's really nasty stuff. Now we're going to get into the higher levels of consciousness and how they were calibrated. At 310, remember the last level of consciousness we looked at was fear at 100. Now, as we fly by 200 and even 300, we are looking at willingness. And willingness is a job well done simply for the purpose of doing the job well. Like Stan, when you volunteered at the library, you didn't do it for monetary gain or for any accolades. You did it because, hey, let's make sure the Dewey Decimal System really works. Willingness is the ability to learn from experience, not only from our personal experience, but from the experiences of others. And I would rather learn from the experiences of others. I've learned too much through personal experience myself that I don't want to relearn. I've been at the ground zero of mushroom clouds more times than I want to even remember. Willingness is excellent students, but it goes beyond just excellent students. It goes to self-taught students. What excites you? Does calculus excite you? Does ancient literature excite you? Or does your passion excite you? Find your passion, you'll be excited. Now you're into willingness. You're willing to learn. Willingness is the gateway to higher levels of consciousness. Next, at 350, calibrating at 350, is acceptance. Acceptance is realizing that one is both the source and the creator of their life's experiences. And this is true. Whatever we think, first, thought precedes action. So whatever we think wholeheartedly leads to actions on our behalf, on our part, that creates our life's experiences. Negative thoughts result in negative actions, and in negative life experiences where positive thoughts result in positive actions and positive life experiences. Acceptance is understanding that the source of happiness lies within oneself, not out there. Acceptance is long-term goals take precedence over short-term ones. And here's where we get into the phrase that probably everybody has heard, penny wise and pound foolish. How many people would grab a penny today and forsake a pound tomorrow? Most people will. Acceptance is self-discipline. And this is where self-mastery is prominent. Acceptance is also not polarized by external conflicts or opposition. We're not concerned about what's going on out there. We're too busy building our temple over here. Does this mean you can't help your fellow man? Of course not. What this means is that you shouldn't be subjected to the whims of the different factions of society that are continually pulling on us one direction or the other. Then calibrating at 500 is love. Now, love is an overused, often abused, and misunderstood word. So let's replace it with something called kindness. Now think about, we're told that love is unselfish acts on our behalf towards someone else. But let's look at this concept of love. That's the way society looks at it. I love you, you love me, let's go to bed. 6 months later, they're in divorce court, right? That's modern love. But love in its true meaning is kindness. These are the little acts we do every day, expecting nothing, absolutely nothing in return. It's something as simple as putting the divider on the checkout counter so that the other person can put their goods to be checked out. We're doing them a favor. They can't quite reach the divider. We put it there for them. And they say, thank you. Did we expect anything in return? No. Love can be, kindness is helping an animal that might be crippled. I mean, these things go on forever and ever. Kindness is you're checking out a book at the library, and the librarian tells some little girl that she can't check her book out because her parents owe 35 cents overdue dues. And you just say, hey, come on. You take 35 cents out of your pocket, give it to the librarian, the girl checks out her books, and she runs away happy. These are acts of kindness which you expect nothing in return. Nothing. Letting somebody in front of you in traffic. Act of kindness. You expect nothing in return. And you might have diffused that person who just got cut off 5 or 10 minutes ago. So let's replace, when we think about love, I suggest we replace the word love with kindness, and we'll get a better idea of what we're talking about here. Then after love comes peace. Peace is extremely rare. Peace calibrates at 600. Peace is transcendence, it's bliss, it's awareness of the God consciousness within ourselves. In the Indian culture, not American Indian, but from India, they have a saying. And this is a greeting, and it's not only a greeting, but it's also when somebody's leaving, two people are leaving. They put their hands together, put the thumbs to their heart chakra, and say namaste. You've probably all heard that. Namaste means the God in me recognizes the God in you. And it's a very polite greeting, and when two people are leaving each other. Then at 700 to 1,000, we have enlightenment, and enlightenment is experienced by very few mortals throughout history. These are the master teachers, the sages, the avatars, which infrequently inhabit and remain in this realm. Into this plus 300 level, we can also include freedom, awareness, honesty, respectfulness, etc. However, keep in mind that if we demand these traits for ourselves, if we demand freedom for ourselves, we must also allow freedom for others. And there's a reason for this. We cannot impose any restrictions on others. To do so would entail the use of force, which will automatically weaken our own consciousness. I mean, this is powerful stuff. There's an extensive list of the various emotions and their polar opposites listed in this book. So if you're experiencing something that you know is a negative attitude and you want to replace it with something else, and we'll discuss that too real briefly, you can look in here for different levels of consciousness or emotions, same thing, and they're polar opposites. Replacing a negative attitude with a positive attitude builds our character. About 3 months ago, I had an event happen to me. And I'm not going to get into the event because it's irrelevant. But it shattered me. It really, really shattered me. And it left me with a feeling of frustration and anger, quite frankly. Frustration and confusion. So what I did, simply because I've been studying this stuff for so many decades, I realized what was happening to me. And I had to get rid of the confusion and the frustration. I mean, it wasn't a major event, but to me it was. It happened at the wrong time in the wrong way, and it really clobbered me. So what I did, and this is me, I went into a subdued level. I relaxed completely. I focused on these two emotions of confusion and frustration. And I held my hand on my heart chakra, and then I just threw them on the ground. And I couldn't believe it. All of a sudden, my problem was gone. I ridded myself of these two emotions of confusion and frustration. I was confused. I was frustrated. And then I took my right hand and I replaced it with clarity. I replaced confusion with clarity and frustration with encouragement. But I was shocked to feel the release when I threw it on the ground of confusion and frustration. It was amazing. So we can do these things. And you just have to know you can do it. And it takes work. But you have to do it with a clear, open mind. You can't do it when you're angry. You have to release everything. You have to become so psychologically, so mentally neutral that you can discard the negative aspect that you want to get rid of so that the positive aspect fills up the entire void. Now, you might be going through an emotion, a negative emotion, that you can't find a polar opposite for in this book. Well, you can go to Thesaurus Online, and they list everything. And all you've got to do is throw in your negative emotion, and they have the antonym for the negative emotion, and you focus on that. An increase in consciousness, which is what we're all concerned about, can occur by simply focusing on the next higher level of consciousness, even if it's below 200. So let's say someone wants to get out of guilt. They can raise their consciousness, which calibrates at 30. They can get out of guilt by simply focusing on grief. But we don't want to just do that. We want to go to the higher levels. Willingness, acceptance, good stuff. And by focusing on willingness, by focusing on acceptance, by focusing on kindness, and by focusing on peace, we build our character. But keep in mind that we're surrounded by negative emotions all around us, the news, the world, everything is negative emotions. Pretty much 85% of society operates on the level which calibrates below 100. Anger, grief, guilt trips, things of that nature. Okay. An increase in consciousness can occur by simply focusing on the next higher level of consciousness. We just mentioned that. Furthermore, where have I heard furthermore before? Furthermore, the calibration figures do not represent an arithmetic figure, but they represent a logarithmic progression. So, the numerical level of 300 is not twice the value of 150, but it is 10 to the 300th power of 150. So it's not a linear scale as we're going and increasing our level of consciousness. It's a logarithmic scale. So again, 300 is not twice the value of 150. It's much, much more. An increase of even a few points represents a major advance in power. The rate of increase in power as we move up the scale is enormous. The border between force and power. All levels below 200 are destructive. And if anybody wants further information, just buy the book. Sure. What I'm covering here is pretty much a teaser tidbit of what's in that book. That goes real deep. All levels below 200 are destructive of life in both the individual and society at large. And what is society functioning at today? You all know what's going on out there. Shame, guilt, grief, fear, right? It's being fed to us minute by minute. And without realizing what's happening to us, this is all subconscious. Without sitting back and realizing what's happening to us, we get sucked in. Now, hopefully, we have a little bit better idea. Hey, wait a minute, I'm not playing this game anymore. You guys are on your own. All levels below 200 are destructive of life in both the individual and society at large. All levels above 200 are constructive expressions of power. The decisive level of 200 is the fulcrum, the balancing point that divides the general areas of force and power. Power, in this case, is not power, it's power over ourselves. And force is anything we're forcing upon someone else or someone else is forcing upon us. Individuals who calibrate below 200 possess no reading material, Stan. So you're okay. Because Stan ran the library. They even gave him the keys. So we know Stan is okay. Individuals who calibrate below 200 possess no reading materials. Individuals who calibrate above 300 focus their minds on ideas and ideals. They're not interested in societal arguments of any kind. And here's a quotation that I like. And I'm going to repeat this twice. Small minds talk about people. Average minds talk about things. Great minds discuss ideas. Small minds talk about people. Here we're talking about gossip. This is the level of the smallest minds. Average minds talk about things. Evening news, politics, the way things should be. Well, things are the way they are. Great minds discuss ideas and ideals. This is the realm of the great minds. Very small percentage of people calibrate there. However, where does society generally calibrate at this moment in time? While the level of consciousness of mankind as a whole has stood at a perilous 190 for many centuries, in the mid-1980s, it suddenly jumped to the hopeful level of 207. Now, keeping in mind that 207 is not that big of a deal, we're not really ascending to any higher level of consciousness till 300. And 300 takes into consideration willingness and acceptance, love, peace, and enlightenment. However, 85% of the world's population calibrates below 200, 85% below 200. It is impossible, and this is going to get into an area where we try to explain something of a higher ideal to someone else, and they just don't get it. They argue with you and they fight with you, and they say, well, what if this, what if that? Well, what ifs don't matter. What is matters. It is impossible for a person functioning below the consciousness level of 200 to understand the sublime truths recognized by those whose consciousness levels are in excess of 200. A person has got to climb, just like when we climbed through school. You didn't automatically walk into the second grade and do calculus and analytic geometry. What did you have to first do? You have to first recognize what numbers are. Then, after you recognize what numbers are, then you had to recognize what numbers do. So you were introduced into simple addition, division, subtraction, multiplication. And then after that, you were introduced into what? Fractions. And little by little, you stepped up, stepped up, stepped up, until finally, if you wanted to pursue calculus and analytic geometry and all that stuff that puts you in a padded room, then you could pursue it. But at least you were prepared to do that. You can't go straight to calculus and analytic geometry. You have to first start with understanding, what does number 1 represent? What does number 5 represent? What can you do with these numbers? Fractions, everything. So you cannot elevate a person to a higher level of consciousness that only they can do it for themselves. And the only way they can do it for themselves is by accepting the fact that they're operating at a lower level of consciousness and work at improving themselves. Now, you can give them a suggestion, but that's as far as it goes. To force somebody to be at a higher level of consciousness, you're getting into a war. It is impossible for a person functioning below the consciousness level of 200 to understand the sublime truths recognized by those whose consciousness levels are in excess of 200. They have to work up to them. The sub-200 minds are the easiest ones to control. These are the people who can't wait to be the first ones to cast a vote, right? Like, it's going to matter. If you cast it today, if you cast it 2 weeks down the road, who cares? Same thing. But they've got to be the first one in line. They're the easiest ones to control, indoctrinate, and rule. And when you consider that 85% of the population operates at the sub-200 level, it's easy to see why they're so easily manipulated by the evening news and religious dogma and on and on and on and on. The sub-200 level of consciousness is what Madison Avenue and bureaucracies focus their messages upon. A note here, subjecting ourselves to these sub-200 levels acts as a drain on our higher levels of consciousness. We may think we can tune them out. However, our subconscious is still listening. So we might say, well, I can listen to the evening news, but I'm not going to pay attention to it. Well, your subconscious is paying attention to it, and it is dragging you down. Next note, we cannot raise the consciousness level of another person. Only that person can do it. And the only way that person can do it is by them saying to themselves, you know, there's a better life than this, and I need to find out what it is and make the necessary adjustment. But only they can do it. You can't make them do it. Some interesting notes here. There is a notably wide disparity between the calibrated comparison readings of the original spiritual foundations of the world's great religions and their subsequent present formal expressions. Okay, let's do this again. That was a nasty sentence. There is a big disparity between the initial teachings of any religion and the current situation of that religion once the bureaucracy is formed, because the bureaucracy of that religion is focusing on controlling its masses. The spiritual foundation may be bone solid, but the way that spiritual foundation is diluted and presented to the followers are two entirely different things. Same thing. Same thing. A person must have reached an energy field of at least 200 in one's development to be healable, physically, mentally, or spiritually. A person calibrating below the level of 200 that is still wallowing in guilt, fear, shame, and all that cannot be raised to a higher level until that person says, there's a better world for me out there. Things are not working for me the way I would like them to work. I need to work on myself. And they start looking for answers. Only they can do it. You can't do it for them. If they ask a question, you could guide them to what to look for, but you can't force them to read a book. You can't force them to listen to an educational program. You can't force them. They'll lock you out. Only they can raise their level of consciousness. Only we can raise our level of consciousness. Nobody can do it for us. And here's an interesting thing. A person can jump to a higher level of consciousness by simply focusing on their current conditioning and knowing that it is possible to elevate themselves to a higher state of consciousness. And what that means is a person wallowing in shame, which is the lowest level of consciousness, calibrating at 20, can improve their level of consciousness simply by moving up to guilt. And then moving up to apathy, and then moving up to grief. Do they have to do it that way? No. They could say enough is enough. I'm going to pay the price, and I'm not going to go in a circular motion, a spiral motion up. I'm going straight for the top. But only they can decide that for themselves. We can't. Nobody can force that upon anybody else. Anything that forces itself upon us in any fashion, is not and cannot be in our best interests. Think about this. Somebody who wants to recruit you into their cause, they're not doing it for your best interest. They need recruits. They're doing it in their best interest. Force is the polar opposite of truth. Power, as we defined it, and truth will never force itself upon us in any fashion. Truth is simply this. Hey, here's the truth. It lays it on the ground and it moves on. Take it or leave it. Power, as we defined it here, is control over ourself. Once achieved, this power is constant. When we any aspect of our life, we improve all associated aspects of our life. When our thinking becomes clearer in one aspect of our life, we've elevated our level of thinking so that we see clarity in several different aspects of our life. Force is the attempted control over others. Force must be constantly maintained, and it is a constant drain on the energies of those who are imposing it. Why does society repeat the same message over and over and over and over and over again to the people? This is how force operates. Constant brainwashing, telling us things are this way, we need to do this, we need to give to that, we need to suffer, we need to do this. Well, we don't need to do anything except what's in our best interest. And what's in our best interest helps us to help others who may be one step away from moving up. Can't help others if we can't help ourselves. It has also been discovered that during any form of competition, and this is extremely interesting to me, and it has also been discovered that during any form of competition, when we focus solely on performing our best, we are operating at a higher level of consciousness and consequently experience better results than we do when we focus on beating our opponent. When we enter a race, let's use a foot race for an example. When we enter a foot race and we focus on simply running straight ahead as fast as we possibly can, we've been training for this for a long time, running straight ahead as fast as we can, because we worked at it and we want to prove to ourselves that we're successful at what we worked at, we are operating at a higher level of consciousness than when you look to the guy next to you and say, I'm going to beat your ass. Just saying that, think about how it drags you down just by saying that. So how are we focusing ourselves? Are we focusing ourselves to operate at a higher level of consciousness, or are we considering being better than somebody else? Being better than somebody else is irrelevant. Being the best we can be is what's relevant. Only then can we lead by example. Alcoholics Anonymous has an extremely high level of success because it teaches its members to focus not on the problem, which is alcoholism, drinking, but on the end result, sobriety, peacefulness. So by not focusing that I'm an alcoholic, I need to beat this. Well, that's negative. Now you're trying to defeat a negative aspect, but to say, hey, I'm sober, I'm sober, I'm sober. And that's how people go one day at a time. I'm sober tomorrow, I'm sober tomorrow, I'm sober tomorrow. And before you know it, 6, 9 months are gone by and people say, hey, I don't need this stuff anymore. I used to have about 2 or 3 beers before I went to bed at night just to relax myself. And yeah, you wake up in the morning not feeling it 1,000%. Well, the last drink I had, I think it was when I lived here, April 2014. I tried to drink a beer the other day. I had to spit it out. I had to. It was horrible. Okay, so let me repeat that again. Alcoholics Anonymous has an extremely high level of success because it teaches its members to focus not on the problem, but on the end result. So picture this. In effect, they are actually drawing their future self toward themselves. When you're focusing on the result of something, you are drawing that result toward yourself. And you decrease the time it takes to succeed at accomplishing whatever you're trying to accomplish. How are these various levels of consciousness calibrated? I know you all have this question, and you're all going to raise your hand and nail me with this one about, aha, I got you. This was done, and this is all covered in detail in the book. Test subjects. Testing was done over a 20-year period and involved thousands of test subjects of all ages and personality types and from all walks of life. Testing was done in numerous countries. The test subjects were chosen randomly from all nationalities, ethnic backgrounds, and religions, and ranged in age from children to elders in their 90s. So this was a comprehensive testing that went on. How did they do the testing? Aha, by something called kinesiology. And kinesiology is the study of muscles and their movements. Some of you may be familiar with what kinesiology is. But kinesiology simply means our muscles speak. Test subjects were directed to focus on specific emotions in order to determine how these emotions affected the strength or weakness of their muscles. And this kind of testing requires 2 persons, the tester and the individual being tested. In this form, what they did, something as simple as this. You held out your arm horizontally. Is it horizontal? Okay, horizontally. And they would tell the subject an emotion. And if it's a negative emotion, they could pull the person's arm down real easy. If it was a positive emotion, it took a lot more to pull the arm down. This is kinesiology. In the form they use, it takes 2 persons. But kinesiology can also be accomplished individually, and it can be accomplished in several different ways. One is to focus on an emotion and seeing how it affects your heart. And some people use a pendulum. We can self-test in many different techniques. We can self-test many different things by this technique. You could use a pendulum. A pendulum is a very easy thing to use. You either focus on an emotion and see which way first of all, you have to determine which way the pendulum swings for you. For me, the pendulum swings forward and backward for yes, and left and right for no. So yes is positive, yes, things of that nature. A left is no or negative, things of that nature. And we can self-test many different things by this technique. Now, again, to do a self-test with the pendulum, you really need to have your mind cleared out. You can't be thinking about anything else. You can't be on edge about what your next project is. You have to go into a calm state of mind and let the pendulum work. The reason a pendulum works is not by magic. The reason the pendulum works is because we are two things. We are a material being and we are a spiritual being. Our material being is blocked from our spirit by our mind. Our mind is running rampant almost all the time. And it's not until we clear the mind and get it to go blank that we can access our spiritual realm. We're not trained to do this. So it takes a little bit of work on ourselves to do this. But it works. And then you can ask the yes, and these are all yes-no questions. Is this course I'm taking good for me? Watch the way the pendulum swings again with a blank mind so that spirit can get through. Spirit can only get through when we shut the mind down. And it's not that easy to do, but it's doable. If you try about 4, 5, 6 times, you will eventually calm the mind down and get it out of the way. We can test with the pendulum, for example. We can test the books in our library. Another way, before I get into this, another way, and this is something I experienced myself a few years ago. I went to a health food store. I needed a remedy. So I went to a health food store. I forget what the remedy was. And there was 2 brands. So I said to the girl, which is the better brand? She said, heck, I don't know. She said, why don't you try holding each one to your stomach and see how your body responds? So I did. I held the first one to the stomach and I felt nothing. But you have to calm the mind. The mind must be calm to do this in all of these practices. Did nothing. I held the second one to me and it literally pulled me forward. I bought that one. So there's a number of ways we can self-test. We don't need a second person to be pulling our arm down to test us kinesiology-wise. We can do this ourselves. We could do it with a pendulum. We can do it by holding our hand to our heart chakra, which I discussed before when I threw away those negative emotions that were bothering me. But we can self-test many different things by this technique. Again, the books in our library, the music we listen to. There's a big chapter on different types of music in that book. Healing remedies, which we just discussed when I went to the health food store. Hold it to your stomach, see what kind of reaction you get. We can self-test our physical health. Vibrant health follows alignment with high energy attractor patterns or higher consciousness levels. Alignment with weak consciousness patterns results in disease. So if we're aligning our self with higher consciousness patterns, wellness, peace, freedom, acceptance, our health is being self-bettered. When we align ourselves with anger, hatred, jealousy, fear, man, just saying the words pulls you down. It aligns you with something that you don't want to really be involved with. We can self-test acquaintances and business associates. Think about the power of this. There's a technique that is given to people when they are making a major decision on any kind of a life experience, a job transfer, anything. It could be any major life change, and we're told to write down the positive aspects of that change on one side of the page and the negative, and see which one exceeds the other. Well, guess what? You'll never finish doing that, because the more you think about it, the more you're going to add to each side of the page. But by holding your hand to your heart chakra, calming the mind, asking the question, and saying, Spirit, please guide me, you will get an answer. But the mind has got to be clear. Mind has got to be completely clear so Spirit can come through the mind and give you the answer. In ancient lore, and I'm talking about ancient Egypt, ancient Sumeria, ancient India, the mind was considered as part of the body. So, part of the physical. So when we're listening to the mind, we're always going to have a push-pull tug of war going on with the mind. But when we access Spirit directly, we'll get an answer. I'm speaking from myself, but anybody here who wants to try it, got to work on yourself. Why this works? We are all part of a larger consciousness, all of us. Our higher consciousness, our spiritual self, operates on a level of insight, intuition, and cosmic awareness. Something that our rational, logical mind, our ego, works hard at suppressing. So when we're using our mind, we're putting our ego in charge, but when we're using our spirit, we're only going to get one answer, yes or no. We can also do this kind of testing on ourselves through the use of a pendulum. But the pendulum question must also be posed as a yes-no basis. Years ago, in Las Vegas, I belonged to a dowsing club, which doesn't exist anymore. And I had a pendulum, and someone brought in 5 envelopes, which they laid face down on a table, one next to each other. And they asked each person to take their pendulum and go over each one and see what kind of reading they get out of each one, whether it's a yes or no, or whether it's a yes or a no. I didn't watch anybody doing it because I didn't want to be, maybe influenced by what's going on. And I forget what happened on 4 envelopes, but I remember what happened on one because it was powerful. I held the pendulum over this envelope and it went wild, left to right, which is a no. I turned the envelope over, it said arsenic. So we can get a lot of answers to a pendulum, but again, you have to work at yourself. The mind has got to be totally blank, which for the average person is pretty simple. But for us, we have to work at calming our mind down because the mind is the ego, and the ego does not want to let go. So calming the mind down is important, and focusing these questions with a calm, blank mind is critical. When the mind is calm, state the question. It's got to be a yes, no, and let the pendulum give you the answer. And you don't go back and say, well, let's do 2 out of 3 if you don't get the answer you want. It's not a 2 out of 3 deal. We can also self-test ourselves by holding our hand to our heart or even to our stomach while asking ourselves a question and then seeing how we feel after we ask the question. The importance of calming the mind and being specific and accurate in the forming of our inquiries is done through meditation. Meditation works. Through meditation, we learned how to get a blank mind. And getting a blank mind is the prerequisite for accessing spirit. Spirit is going to have a hell of a time coming through our mind because the mind is the ego acting like a roadblock, and it's going to confuse us. So we need direct access to spirit, and the only way to really do that is by getting the mind out of the way. And one thing I do when I'm meditating, I do it in a laying down position, and I let all my thoughts just drain down the side of my head into the pillow or to the cushion until I'm finally clear of mind. Then I can get into a meditative state. And calming the mind, again, is a necessary requirement for getting accurate answers from the higher consciousness. And now, in closing, a couple of comments. Enlightenment is said to be relatively rare, and it is. Not so much because of the difficulty of following the necessary steps to get there, but because it is a condition of interest to very few, particularly in modern society. If we were to stop 1,000 people in the street and ask them, what is your greatest ambition in life? How many would say to be enlightened? Probably none. But we as Masons work on these levels. So these concepts should be familiar to us. Wisdom can ultimately be reduced to the simple process of avoiding what makes you go weak and pursuing what makes you go strong. Nothing else is really required. And with that, I close my presentation and leave it open to any questions. No questions? Okay. Any questions? Scotty, be kind, be gentle with me.
Assume that we have power. How do we suggest that we use that power to counteract force without ultimately resulting in force?
I'm going to repeat the question the best I can for the microphone. Assuming we can use power to better ourselves, how do we use power without using force?
How do we use power to counteract
How do we use power to counteract force?
without resulting in using force? Yeah.
Well, how do we use power to counteract force without becoming forceful ourselves? Okay. First of all, let me ask you the nature of your question. Are you looking at this from an aspect of self-betterment or from trying to improve someone else?
Trying to help someone else get through a lower level of hunger.
You can't.
I agree.
You can't.
Yeah.
All you can do is buy them the book, see if they read it. As we discussed at the beginning, you cannot raise a person's consciousness level. You can't do it. Only they can do it. But sometimes they have to be aware. Sometimes they have to be aware that they can do it. A lot of people are willing to improve themselves, but they say, where do I go? What do I do? All you can do is point out an avenue, but you cannot make them follow it. A lot of people will say, well, I want to better myself. I want to do this. I want to become more enlightened. But then you tell them, well, try this book, see if it helps you at all. And they say, well, wait a minute, I got to read that? I got a cribbage game tonight. I can be sitting down reading 180 pages of something else. You tell me what to do and I'll do it. Well, you can't do that. Only they can do it. Only they can do it. You can point the direction, but only they can travel the path.
You could lead a horse to water.
You can lead a horse to water, yes, but you can't make it drink. Stan,
You said about confusion in all these years I've known you. I cannot imagine that you've ever been confused or frustrated about anything.
huh,
But I do want to give an example. I have a very close friend, very pragmatic, totally black and white, not spiritual, not religious, had gone through a very down period of his life for many years.
has gone through a down period of what?
Life.
Okay.
So one day he was in sales, executive in his company, in a high rise. He was on the bottom floor of a high rise, talking to a gentleman, and he could see out the window into the parking lot where his Lincoln was parked while he was making his pitch, watching his car being towed away. I thought, wow, this is the bottom. And it was the bottom for him without going all the stuff he went through for many years. So I asked him, because I saw him, we talked a lot, and it was sometime later, like years later, I said, how did you get out of it? Because very, very successful. He said, I went into my mind. This is not a non-spiritual person. He said, I went into my mind, I shoveled all the crap in my mind into a bucket. And I carried the bucket out into the gutter, and I dumped it into the gutter. And that was my beginning of my forward trend. I just thought that was kind of fit into that. I have just two other minor comments. The one that you made about feeding the two wolves. I think that's really interesting because I think at least one, if not many, of the ancient religions emphasized two souls. And the two souls basically were the animal soul and the sublime soul, and which one you fed. So it goes really back a long, long time. And I do have just one question. You use the word fear numerous times. Can the word awe, A-W-E, be substituted for the word fear?
I don't see why not. But again, words are very clumsy. You have to keep this in mind. When we're trying to find a specific word that resolves a dilemma for us, let's say we're trying to find the positive word for some aspect of negativity that's bothering us. What that word means to us is not necessarily the same thing as what that word means to someone else. So to say, can you replace fear with awe? Depending on your level of thinking, it could work. But if the person doesn't really understand what awe means,
I've not read that book, and I do want to, but is much of the core or basis of that book based on the Stoic philosophers?
no, this was all done on testing, period.
All scientific.
All scientific.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If you want to, actually, it's spiritual, but it's done in a scientific way. Scotty, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
There's an old Scottish proverb that if you suffer from depression, you're living in the past. If you suffer from anxiety, you're living in the future. But if you're at peace, you're living in the present. Now, when you say clearing of the mind and letting the spirit come through, are you talking, releasing the ego? That seems to be a very difficult thing. And I'm thinking personally, I don't think I can ever release my ego. But is releasing the ego to get to the spirit, is it the spiritual universal consciousness or some spiritual great architect of the universe consciousness that you're allowing in to replace the ego.
Quite frankly, in the spiritual realm, there is no duality. So if there's no duality, there's only one. So the great architect of the universe and the spiritual aspect of yourself, or the greater spirit, they're all one and the same. They're all one and the same. We have our spiritual self residing within us for as long as the material body is doing whatever it's doing. But correct, the spiritual portion of ourselves is connected to the infinite, the all, the eternal. We're not trained this way. Now, if you go to the Far East, they are trained this way. And they look at things not only from an academic point of view, but they also meditate upon what they're learning. We don't do that in this country. We're given, in my first day when I tried, I figured maybe I should try this college stuff on myself. And I went to college and they said, okay, in the first week I had 5 or 6 classes. Read the first 16 chapters from your English book. Then you go into arithmetic, do the first 37 problems in your math book. Then you went to another class, read the next 6 chapters. Wait a minute, I don't have time. There's not enough time for this. So what are we doing in the West? We are cramming. For what purpose? Simply to pass an exam. Simply to pass an exam. Where in the East, it's operated, and in the ancient mystery schools especially, it's done differently. A person is given a lesson. After being given the lesson, they are sent back to their room or dorm, or if they're in a monastery, whatever they call their room over there, to meditate, to not only learn the lesson, left brain, but to meditate and contemplate right brain on what they're experiencing, what they're feeling. So in the Eastern school of education, they're using both sides of the brain. Left,
the anxiety of learning.
hold that thought. Where we don't do that in this country. And that's why it's so hard to grasp some of these techniques if we've never explored that right brain aspect of ourselves. I'm sorry.
That eliminates the anxiety of learning.
No kidding. No kidding.
If you're taking anxiety out, you've already gone repeat.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, please repeat.
That eliminates the anxiety of learning, and so therefore you have taken that anxiety and you have elevated up into a higher level of consciousness.
Yes. You've replaced anxiety with awareness.
Yeah.
Scotty, did I answer your question satisfactory?
I have 2 issues on what you're just discussing in terms of cramming and learning. My younger years, after the war, my dad was Lebanese, and we
Your
sold
dad
the
was what?
farm, and I moved to Lebanon.
Lebanese, okay.
And while I was in Lebanon, I was at 14 when I got there. Obviously, I didn't know the language, so I went to school. And as you may know from history, France had control of Lebanon for a while, and the English had control. And then finally, they had their own government. Well, in the school system, they taught you 2 languages. At that time, it was French and Arabic. So all morning, we were taught ABCs, verbs, nouns, reading, and so on and so forth. At lunchtime, we'd go to lunch, come back. In the afternoon, identical same subjects were taught in Arabic. So after you graduated, I didn't go that far, I went 2 years, but after you would graduate out of high school, you were the master of two languages because you were taught identical parts of it. You didn't just, and that's the biggest mistake we make in this country. We try to teach Hispanic kids English by just talking to them or running through a book or something. No, you need to teach them their own language parallel to our language. They would learn much faster and they would keep that knowledge from both languages. And the old saying in our Arabic terms, for each language you know, you're another person. Now you go to high school, you have to take a third language. And there you had the choice of English, German, and Spanish. So when you graduate, I'm sorry, when you go to college, you already graduated high school, you go to college, you had a working knowledge of a third language. And people here often wonder, how come Europeans know so many languages? It's very simple, because they're taught the basics of each language. And my second point.
Can I respond to that before you
Sure.
get to the second point?
Go ahead.
Don't forget the second point. This is probably the only country where we speak only one language. When you think about it,
Oh, yeah.
most other countries speak the children as they're raised are taught the second and maybe a third language.
Well, Scandinavian countries start up in their elementary systems.
But this is the only country where, we pompously demand people to understand what we're saying, and we go to a foreign country and we're lost. Most countries, you could speak French in, possibly German in. How many of us do that? We go to a foreign country, we can't communicate, but they can in several languages.
My second point is when you're saying you can't force a person to do something, but you can lead them that way.
Mm-hmm.
In my younger years, when I was in the service, one of my career paths was to become an instructor. So I went to a 6-week course, learned how to be an instructor. But I felt that I still had some misgivings about standing up in front of 50, 60, and as many as 300 troops, espousing some information that they should know and understand. And someone directed me to Toastmasters, and that's why I see that now. So I willingly found out where there were courses, and I went through Toastmasters, and that was a huge change. I learned the basic foundation in those 6 weeks, but I learned how to be a speaker after going through that course. And eventually I became a master instructor in my field.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I was given a path. I willingly took that path. I think it reinforces what you were saying earlier. You cannot make a person change, but if they want to change, they can.
Yes, all we can do is, if we're asked, give them guidance and step away. If they don't take the next step initiative, they're not really concerned. Now, I want to comment on your Toastmasters. Many years ago, I was so shy that you could not believe it. Even me looking back, I couldn't believe it. You don't believe me, do you?
Were you shy as Ken Lane?
Ken Lane.
So that's me. Sorry.
Oh,
Don't get sucked into his world. Keep going.
no, nobody's as shy as he is. I was so bad that
How bad were you?
I'll tell you how bad I was, Johnny Carson. I will tell you how bad I was. When I first met the person who was going to be my wife, I didn't have the courage to introduce myself. I had to have a friend introduce me to her. And he did it in such an embarrassing way that I really wanted to kill him, except he was stronger than me. But that's another story. But I was so shy, and I'm serious. I was so shy. After I was married, I wouldn't answer the phone if it rang. I made my wife answer the phone.
Oh,
That's how shy I was because I knew if it was a salesman, I was a dead duck. So what did I do? I joined Toastmasters. And my first speech, I was so scared. My tongue felt like a big cotton ball. I was scared to death. Guess what? I won Speaker of the Week out of 4 speakers. I won Speaker of the Week the first 4 weeks. I said, you know, I'm not as bad as I thought I was. Toastmasters is awesome. Awesome. Next.
so Ken Lane,
Ken Lane, my man.
I've heard that I'm not shy, and I'm not. But okay, but I am slow. So I was taking notes. I wasn't texting. I was actually taking notes, but I need help making sure I got these right. And so you started out with shame at 20. Yeah, pull the notes out. Then it went to guilt, which is 30,
Correct.
apathy, 50, fear, which I'm not sure is all.
Grief was next.
Dang it. See how that is?
It's in the book, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not going to read the book. I just like coming to.
He wants just perfection. He doesn't want to work at it.
We got grief. Then we got fear.
Yes.
Then we have anger.
Well, anger can be thrown into that sub 200 group.
Gotcha. Hatred,
Yes.
sub 200. Jealousy,
Yes.
sub 200. And then we get into it goes above the line.
Yes.
Now we're going to willingness or self-taught students, that kind of stuff. Then it's acceptance, love, kindness.
Yes.
Then we go to peace or bliss or God's consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Then we go to freedom. What's the last one? I missed it. I apologize. Enlightenment. Gotcha. And that was the last one.
Yes.
Now, my question is,
Okay, before you,
Peace was in there somewhere.
we got it.
Well,
Got to
yeah.
keep up. Ted.
peace is 600.
Yeah.
Now, before you ask your question, don't forget the question. I just want to make a comment. There are a multitude of other different emotions involved, and
Yes.
most of them are listed in there.
Yeah.
But these are the ones that they really focused on to give an idea of how we elevate our levels of consciousness.
So the big thought is, as you take steps forward through these different emotions or enlightenments, there's a huge learning curve or steep curve. It's not just linear.
It's
it goes
parabolic.
like a rocket. It goes shunk. The question is, could the inverse also happen? That is, if you surround yourself with negative thinkers, or you're married to, or your colleagues, or you're in an organization that is more bringing you down as an anchor, can it also go down in the same, like an anchor? Can it go down that way?
Not exactly, because,
Okay.
and let's go back to our simple example of a child learning arithmetic. So a child learns to add 1 and 1 or 2, or they learn to divide something or multiply. They learn their multiplication tables. If you put them back in basic grammar school to learning the figures, did they forget how to do subdivision, the long division or multiplication? No. You just brought them down, and now the child
That's pretty good, actually.
and now the child is going to be bored. So what you're asking is, once you achieved a level of consciousness, can you be dragged down
Or held back,
or help? I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. And the answer is yes and no. Once you know something, once you know something, you can't relinquish it. It's there. What you can do is relinquish your sovereignty. And if you relinquish your sovereignty, then you're going to descend on a level of
squelch
consciousness.
the spirit, possibly.
We can't squelch the spirit. No, once the spirit has reached
I
this
can
level.
if I clog my mind with junk. I don't lay my head on the pillow and let it flow out. I just let it be. I'm still taking a
Want
picture.
to hold the book open so you can take a picture.
Stop it.
Let's not have any domestic problems here.
Protect it from. It'd be nothing but better if he touched it.
You would be so frustrated. Not you, but anyone who tried. From what I think you're asking me, is you get involved in a bad relationship that's pulling you down, but you've already ascended. How do you handle that? There's only one answer to that, and I'm not going to give it to you. Ted,
I can give you a real life example.
hold your thought.
In our world of competition, you cover that, realizing a goal versus beating somebody.
Yes.
Way back in 1984, I set an objective to run my first marathon. There's a lot of work to run, a lot of training to run a marathon. So when I finished, I was elated that I had actually covered 26.2 miles. Now, when you run a marathon, like if it's Chicago, LA, there's 23,000 people running the same day. I was running one from Ravinia, which is like on the border of Wisconsin, down to Chicago, or Zion in northern Illinois down to Ravinia, which is just about north of Chicago. So there were only a couple thousand in this. So when I finished, I was so elated, and my family was there. And I called my mom and said, "Mom, I finished my first marathon." Now, being a cynic from New Jersey, her first question was,
Cynic in New Jersey, I
Yeah,
can't even fathom
there's
that.
only one or two there. Her first question was, "Did you win?" Now, I had to process that. I said, well, I put in perspective, well, that's her, right?
Yeah.
And then I said, I'm elated that I actually covered 26.2 miles. When you're up against thousands of people, you're not thinking about winning, you're thinking about accomplishing your goal. So there's an example where someone unconsciously was asking a question to tear me down, and it didn't work because I had reached that level of accomplishment that, yep, I set a goal and I got it done. Forget the time. By the way, that was the best time I ever ran in 10 other marathons.
Thank you.
Well, I was just going to comment on.
Name, please. I'm not.
I was just going to comment on what Lynn, our esteemed member here mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
It's a reverse process of the person showing the person a way, and they, on their own, take that way. If you've achieved that level above, and for whatever reason or through whatever process, environment change or whatever is going to bring you down, you have to make that conscious decision to go down. You're not just going to fall down tomorrow. You're going to possibly.
You have to submit. You have to choose to submit.
It's a matter of submitting either way, up or down.
Yeah.
Don't think.
Look, to try to expound on your comment just a little bit more. Once you achieve a certain level, you cannot relinquish it. It's always there. What you can relinquish is your sovereignty. And once you've reached a certain level and relinquish your sovereignty, you're going to be miserable.
Well, that goes on to what I was going to ask. If you're of an elevated consciousness, isn't it addicting to stay there? Isn't it subconsciously addicting to say, I'm up here and piss on all this stuff that I used to think was important, because it's not anymore. And so you get addicted to that feeling. You listen to your body and you think, my body feels better, so I feel better. So why do I want to go anywhere else other than up? It seems like it'd be addicting.
Yes, this is very true. You are at that point. You're spiraling up.
Yeah, slow.
slow, yeah, slow, yeah. Well, eternity is a long time, so we have all eternity to play. And the being in the material realm is it's got a lot of difficulties, but acknowledging what the difficulties are, recognizing them and acknowledging them is the first step. But to not know what the difficulties are, that's frustrating. Because there are higher levels to achieve, but we have to know that they're available. Know, not believe, but know.
Okay, so we've been at this for about an hour and 15 minutes. Does anybody have any final thoughts that they want to bring up?
Well, I'll bring up one.
Okay.
I've had a rough month, as some of you know, and when you explained about the world, which we translate as TV and news and negativity, my stroke on September 23rd, I've only watched TV probably 2 hours in a month because not only is it noise, but it's negativity. And I had to heal. So the best way to heal was quiet. And I'll leave it at that.
This is very true. I haven't watched TV in a decade, maybe more. And not quite true. I went to visit my daughter in Mesa about 2 or 3 years ago. And I was bored at night, so I turned the TV on in the motel. And all I remember was commercials and commercials and commercials. I said, now I know why I don't watch TV anymore.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. I hope you'll come back and do the same for us on another topic.
Be delighted.